Sarah's hands moved fast on the dying man's chest. 1, 2, 3. She counted each heartbeat. She tried to restart. Then a voice behind her said, "Move your ambulance now or I'm calling the police." Bobby Thompson had been dead for 40 minutes. Every second mattered. But rules were rules. Before watching full story, comment below from where you watching. Also like and subscribe for more stories. Sarah Martinez had been a paramedic for 12 years. She had seen it all: car crashes, overdoses, heart attacks, and worse. But nothing had prepared her for what would happen on that sunny Tuesday morning in Willowbrook Estates, an upscale gated community where perfectly manicured lawns stretched like green carpets behind white picket fences. Her radio crackled to life at 10:47 a.m. Unit 23, we have a cardiac arrest at 1247 Maple Grove Drive. 68-year-old male, unresponsive. Sarah's partner, Mike Chin, was already reaching for the sirens. They had worked together for 5 years and their partnership was seamless. No words needed, just the shared understanding that someone's life hung in the balance. The drive to Willowbrook Estates usually took 8 minutes. Today it felt like an eternity. Robert "Bobby" Thompson was watering his prize-winning roses when his heart simply stopped. One moment he was admiring the deep red blooms that reminded him of his late wife Margaret's favorite lipstick, and the next he was lying face down on the concrete driveway, his garden hose still clutched in his weathered hand. His neighbor, Mrs. Eleanor Hayes, saw it happen from her kitchen window. She was the one who called 911, her voice shaking as she tried to explain the address to the dispatcher. Bobby had been her friend for 23 years. They had moved into the neighborhood the same week, young families with dreams of raising their children in this perfect little community. Now at 71, Eleanor watched helplessly as the man who had fixed her leaky faucet just last month lay motionless on his driveway. She ran outside, her arthritis forgotten in her panic, and tried to remember the CPR class she had taken at the community center 3 years ago. "Come on, Bobby," she whispered, pressing her small hands against his chest. "Margaret's waiting for you, but not today. Not today." Sarah and Mike arrived to find Eleanor performing chest compressions, tears streaming down her face. The old woman looked up with desperate hope as the ambulance pulled into the driveway. "He just collapsed," Eleanor gasped. "I've been doing CPR for I don't know how long." "Is he?" Sarah knelt beside Bobby, immediately taking over compressions while Mike prepared the defibrillator. "You did great, ma'am. You kept him alive until we got here." Bobby's skin was gray, his lips blue. Sarah felt for a pulse, nothing. She began compressions, counting under her breath. 1, 2, 3. "Charging," Mike called out. "Clear." The shock made Bobby's body jerk, but the monitor still showed a flat line. Sarah resumed compressions, sweat beading on her forehead despite the cool morning air. That's when she heard the footsteps behind her. "Excuse me, what do you think you're doing?" The voice was sharp, authoritative. Sarah didn't look up from Bobby's chest. She couldn't afford to lose count. "This is private property," the voice continued. "You can't just park that ambulance wherever you want." Mike glanced up to see a man in his 50s wearing a navy blazer despite the warm weather. A gold name tag read, "Gerald Hutchinson, HOA President." "Sir, we're responding to a medical emergency," Mike said calmly, not stopping his work with the 4-line. "I don't care what you're doing. That ambulance is blocking the fire lane. You need to move it immediately or I'll have to call security." Sarah's hands never stopped moving. 30 compressions, 2 breaths. 30 compressions, 2 breaths. Bobby's ribs cracked under the pressure, a sound that made Eleanor wince, but Sarah knew it meant she was doing it right. "Sir, this man is in cardiac arrest," Sarah said through gritted teeth. "We are not moving until we stabilize him." Gerald's face reddened. "I don't care if he's dying. Rules are rules. This community has standards and you people need to follow them like everyone else." Eleanor Hayes had lived through the Great Depression, World War II, and the loss of her husband and both her sons. She had seen enough of life to know what mattered and what didn't. And right now, watching this pompous man threaten the people trying to save her friend's life, she found a strength she didn't know she still had. "Gerald Hutchinson, you shut your mouth this instant," she snapped, her voice carrying the authority of 7 decades. "Bobby is dying and these people are trying to save him. If you say one more word, I'll make sure everyone in this community knows what kind of man you really are." But Gerald wasn't backing down. In his mind, he was protecting property values, maintaining order. He had been HOA president for 8 years, and in that time he had never let anyone break the rules. Not for birthday parties that ran too loud, not for Christmas decorations that stayed up too long, and not for some old man having a heart attack. He pulled out his phone and dialed 911. Yes, I need police at 1247 Maple Grove Drive. There's an ambulance parked illegally, and the crew is refusing to move it. Send someone immediately. Sarah heard every word, but her focus never wavered from Bobby. His heart had been stopped for 12 minutes now. Brain damage became irreversible after 4 to 6 minutes without oxygen. But she had seen miracles before and she wasn't giving up. Come on, Bobby, she whispered. Fight. Officer Daniel Park had been a police officer for 15 years. He had never received a call like this one. When dispatch told him that someone was complaining about an ambulance parked illegally at a medical emergency, he assumed there was some misunderstanding. He arrived to find Sarah still performing CPR, her uniform soaked with sweat. Mike was administering medications through the 4-line, following protocols they had practiced hundreds of times. Eleanor sat on Bobby's front steps, clutching a rosary and praying. And Gerald Hutchinson stood with his arms crossed, tapping his foot impatiently. Officer, thank goodness you're here, Gerald said. These people have been here for 20 minutes and they refuse to move their vehicle. It's clearly marked, no parking in the fire lane. Officer Park looked from Gerald to the scene on the driveway. He had taken first aid training. He knew CPR when he saw it. And he knew that what he was witnessing was a man fighting for his life. Sir, they're performing life-saving measures, Officer Park said carefully. I can't ask them to move during a medical emergency. Gerald's voice rose. I don't care what they're doing. They're in violation of community rules. If you won't do your job, I'll call your supervisor. Sir, please lower your voice. There's a medical emergency in progress. But Gerald was beyond reasoning. In his mind, this was about more than parking rules. It was about respect, about authority, about maintaining the perfect order he had worked so hard to create in Willowbrook Estates. He stepped toward Sarah, reaching for her shoulder. I said move your vehicle now. That's when Officer Park made the decision that would haunt him for the rest of his life. Faced with an increasingly agitated man who was interfering with medical treatment, he did what his training told him to do. He arrested Gerald Hutchinson. But Gerald fought back, screaming about his rights, about property values, about how this wasn't over. In the chaos that followed, he stumbled backward, knocking into Mike's equipment bag and sending medication scattering across the driveway. Stop! Sarah shouted, but it was too late. Gerald's flailing arm caught her shoulder, throwing off her rhythm just as she was preparing to administer another shock. The delay lasted only 30 seconds. But 30 seconds was an eternity when someone's heart had stopped beating. Sarah resumed CPR immediately, her hands finding their rhythm again. But something had changed. Bobby's skin had grown colder, grayer. The spark of life that she had been fighting to rekindle seemed dimmer now. She worked for another 20 minutes, trying every technique she knew, every medication in their arsenal. Mike assisted silently, both of them knowing what the other was thinking but neither willing to say it out loud. Finally, Dr. Elizabeth Morrison's voice crackled over the radio from the emergency room. Sarah had been in contact with her throughout the resuscitation, following advanced protocols. Unit 23, what's your status? Sarah looked at the monitor. Still flatline. She looked at Bobby's face, peaceful now in a way that broke her heart. She looked at Eleanor, who was still clutching her rosary, her lips moving in silent prayer. Dr. Morrison, Sarah's voice caught. We've been working for 43 minutes. No response to medications, no cardiac activity. Patient has been down for an estimated 55 minutes total. There was a long pause on the radio. Unit 23, you're authorized to cease resuscitation efforts. The words hit Eleanor like a physical blow. She had known somewhere deep in her heart, but hearing it made it real. Bobby was gone. Sarah sat back on her heels, her hands finally still after nearly an hour of compressions. She looked at this man she had never met, this stranger whose life had been in her hands, and she felt something break inside her chest. I'm sorry, she whispered to Eleanor. I'm so sorry. The news of Bobby Thompson's death spread through Willowbrook Estates like wildfire. But it wasn't just the death that had people talking, it was the circumstances surrounding it. Eleanor Hayes, despite her grief, made sure everyone knew what had happened. She stood at Bobby's memorial service 3 days later and told the assembled crowd about Gerald Hutchinson's interference, about the delay that might have cost Bobby his life. Bobby was a good man, she said, her voice steady despite her tears. He deserved better than this. He deserved a chance. The story made the local news first. Then the regional papers picked it up. Within a week it had gone viral on social media. The headline that caught everyone's attention: HOA president's interference may have cost heart attack victim his life. Gerald Hutchinson found himself at the center of a media storm. His phone rang constantly: reporters, angry neighbors, attorneys. His own HOA board called an emergency meeting and voted him out of office. The real estate company that managed the community quietly terminated their contract. But for Sarah Martinez, none of that mattered. She lay awake at night, replaying those 30 seconds over and over again. What if she hadn't let Gerald distract her? What if she had ignored him completely? What if Bobby could have been saved? The medical examiner's report took 6 weeks to complete. Dr. James Patterson had been a forensic pathologist for 22 years, and he approached Bobby Thompson's case with the same methodical care he brought to every examination. Bobby's heart showed significant damage from a massive heart attack. His coronary arteries were severely blocked, what doctors called a widow-maker. The kind of heart attack that killed quickly and showed little mercy. But Dr. Patterson also noted something else in his report: the quality of the CPR Bobby had received. Eleanor's compressions had been surprisingly effective for someone her age. Sarah's technique was textbook perfect. Bobby's ribs showed the kind of fractures that indicated proper depth and positioning. In his professional opinion, Dr. Patterson wrote, Bobby Thompson had received excellent emergency care. However, the 30-second delay in resuscitation efforts, occurring at the critical 40-minute mark, may have eliminated any remaining possibility of successful revival. The report was clear: Bobby probably would have died anyway. His heart attack was too severe, had gone on too long before help arrived. But that 30-second delay had taken away whatever slim chance he might have had. It was a medical opinion that provided little comfort to anyone involved. 6 months after Bobby's death, Eleanor Hayes received a visitor. Attorney Maria Santos had read about the case and believed there were grounds for a wrongful death lawsuit. Mrs. Hayes, Maria explained, sitting in Eleanor's living room surrounded by photos of Bobby and her other departed friends, this isn't just about Mr. Thompson. It's about setting a precedent. No one should be allowed to interfere with emergency medical care, especially not over something as trivial as a parking violation. Eleanor was reluctant at first. She wasn't a litigious person, and Bobby wouldn't have wanted a big legal battle. But as Maria explained the broader implications, how this case could protect future patients, how it could ensure that emergency responders wouldn't face this kind of interference again, Eleanor began to see it differently. Bobby always said you have to stand up for what's right, Eleanor finally said. Even when it's hard, especially when it's hard. The lawsuit named Gerald Hutchinson, the Willowbrook Estates HOA and the management company as defendants. The claim was for $10 million in damages for wrongful death, emotional distress and civil rights violations. Gerald's attorney, Thomas Webb, argued that his client had been within his rights as HOA president to enforce community rules. The ambulance was technically parked illegally. Gerald had never intended for anyone to be harmed. But Maria Santos had done her research. She found 17 other cases across the country where HOA officials had interfered with emergency services. She found expert witnesses who could testify about the critical nature of uninterrupted CPR. And she found something else: security camera footage from a house across the street. The footage showed everything. Gerald's aggressive approach, his physical interference, the moment when his actions disrupted Sarah's CPR rhythm. It was all there, recorded in high definition. The trial began on a cold Tuesday morning in November, exactly 1 year after Bobby's death. The courthouse was packed with reporters, neighbors from Willowbrook Estates and paramedics from surrounding communities who had come to support Sarah. Sarah took the stand on the second day. She had been dreading this moment for months, but when Maria Santos asked her to describe what happened, the words came clearly and professionally. I was performing chest compressions on Mr. Thompson, she testified. His heart had been stopped for approximately 40 minutes. Every second mattered at that point. When Mr. Hutchinson physically interfered with my work, it caused a disruption in the CPR rhythm. That 30-second delay occurred at a critical moment when we might still have had a chance to restart his heart. Gerald's attorney cross-examined her aggressively. Isn't it true, Ms. Martinez, that Mr. Thompson was probably going to die anyway? Isn't it true that his heart attack was so severe that nothing you did would have made a difference? Sarah looked directly at Gerald as she answered. Maybe. But it wasn't Mr. Hutchinson's decision to make. My job is to fight for every life, to give every patient every possible chance. His interference took away whatever chance Mr. Thompson might have had. Eleanor Hayes was the most powerful witness. At 72, she walked to the stand with dignity, her silver hair perfectly arranged, wearing the same black dress she had worn to Bobby's funeral. Bobby Thompson was my friend for 23 years, she testified, her voice clear and strong. He was the kind of man who would shovel your driveway after a snowstorm without being asked. He would water your plants when you went on vacation. He would sit with you in the hospital when your husband was dying. She turned to face the jury. That morning I watched him collapse. I tried to save him until the paramedics arrived. And then I watched Mr. Hutchinson interfere with the people who were actually qualified to save Bobby's life. Over a parking space. He cared more about a parking space than he did about my friend's life. The courtroom was silent except for the sound of several jurors wiping their eyes. Gerald Hutchinson's defense rested on one central argument. He had been doing his job. As HOA president, he was responsible for enforcing community rules. The ambulance was parked illegally. He had a right, even a duty, to address the violation. Gerald took the stand in his own defense, wearing the same navy blazer he had worn that morning a year ago. His attorney guided him through his version of events. I approached the paramedics respectfully, Gerald testified. I explained that they were parked in a fire lane, which is a safety violation. I asked them to move their vehicle. When they refused, I felt I had no choice but to call the police. But under cross-examination, Maria Santos revealed a different side of Gerald Hutchinson. She introduced evidence of his previous actions as HOA president, the fines he had levied for minor infractions, the lawsuits he had filed against neighbors for trivial violations, the complaints from residents about his aggressive enforcement style. Mr. Hutchinson, Maria asked, in your 8 years as HOA president, did you ever make an exception to the rules for any reason? No. Rules are rules. If you start making exceptions, the entire system breaks down. Not even for emergencies? There are proper procedures for emergencies. Paramedics should know better than to park illegally. So in your view, following parking rules was more important than allowing emergency personnel to save a man's life? Gerald's face reddened. That's not. I never said that. I was trying to maintain order. At what cost, Mr. Hutchinson? At what cost? The jury deliberated for 3 days. On Friday afternoon they returned with their verdict. Guilty on all counts. They found Gerald Hutchinson, the HOA, and the management company liable for Bobby Thompson's wrongful death. The damages, $10 million, exactly what Eleanor and Maria had asked for. But more than the money, the verdict sent a message. Emergency responders could not be interfered with, regardless of property rules or community regulations. Human life took precedence over everything else. Gerald sat stunned as the verdict was read. He had been so certain that he was in the right, so convinced that his actions were justified. Now, facing financial ruin and public disgrace, he finally began to understand the magnitude of what he had done. After the trial, he approached Eleanor in the hallway outside the courtroom. Mrs. Hayes, he said quietly, I never meant for anyone to die. I was just trying to do my job. Eleanor looked at him for a long moment. At 72, she had learned that anger was too heavy a burden to carry. But forgiveness didn't mean forgetting. Bobby was a good man, Gerald. He deserved better. The Bobby Thompson case, as it became known in legal circles, led to significant changes in HOA law across the country. 43 states passed legislation specifically protecting emergency responders from interference by homeowners associations and property management companies. Sarah Martinez received commendation from her department and recognition from the State Paramedics Association. But the award that meant the most to her came from an unexpected source. Eleanor Hayes gave her Bobby's garden hose, the one he had been holding when he collapsed. He loved those roses, Eleanor said. I can't take care of them anymore, but maybe you could use this in your garden. Bobby would like that. Sarah planted roses in her backyard that spring, deep red ones that reminded her of the color of life, of hope, of the fights worth fighting. The Willowbrook Estates HOA was dissolved 6 months after the trial. The community became a regular suburban neighborhood, without gates or guards or presidents who valued rules over human lives. Property values didn't collapse as Gerald had feared. In fact, they rose slightly as families moved in who valued community over conformity. Gerald Hutchinson filed for bankruptcy and moved away. His new neighbors never learned about his past, and he never served on another HOA board. Sometimes, late at night, he would think about that morning and wonder what would have happened if he had just walked away. 1 year after the trial, on the 2nd anniversary of Bobby's death, Eleanor Hayes organized a memorial service in the small park where Willowbrook Estates Community Center used to stand. The new residents had voted to tear down the building and create a public space instead. They planted an oak tree in Bobby's memory with a plaque that read, Robert Thompson, a good neighbor and friend. 1957 to 2025. Sarah Martinez attended the ceremony, along with Mike Chin and dozens of other paramedics and firefighters. They came to honor Bobby's memory, but also to remember the importance of their work and the obstacles they sometimes faced. Eleanor spoke to the gathered crowd, her voice stronger now than it had been during the trial. Bobby believed in helping people, she said. He believed that when someone was in trouble, you didn't worry about rules or appearances or what the neighbors might think. You just help. That's what it means to be human. She looked around at the faces in the crowd, young families, elderly couples, children playing on the grass where Bobby used to walk his dog. We can't bring Bobby back. But we can honor his memory by remembering what really matters. Not the rules we follow or the appearances we maintain, but the kindness we show to each other when it matters most. As the ceremony ended and people began to disperse, Sarah found herself standing alone by the oak tree. She thought about all the calls she had responded to since that morning, all the lives she had tried to save. Some she had lost, others she had saved. But each one mattered. Eleanor approached, moving slowly but with purpose. "Thank you for coming," the older woman said. "Thank you for fighting," Sarah replied. "For Bobby and for all of us." They stood together in comfortable silence, two women who had been brought together by tragedy but found something like peace in its aftermath. 5 years later, the Bobby Thompson Emergency Response Protection Act had been passed in all 50 states. It created criminal penalties for anyone who interfered with emergency medical services, and civil liability for organizations that allowed such interference. Sarah Martinez was promoted to Supervisor of Emergency Services for her county. She used her position to advocate for first responders and to train new paramedics about the importance of their work. Eleanor Hayes, now 77, became a volunteer with the local emergency services, teaching CPR classes to seniors. She always started each class the same way: you never know when you might be the only thing standing between someone you love and death. The roses in Sarah's garden bloomed every spring, deep red and beautiful. She would water them with Bobby's old garden hose and remember that morning when 30 seconds changed everything. Gerald Hutchinson never appeared in the news again. But sometimes, in quiet moments, former residents of Willowbrook Estates would wonder what their lives might have been like if their HOA president had simply walked away that morning instead of choosing rules over humanity. The oak tree in Bobby's memory grew tall and strong, its branches providing shade for children playing in the park. And every year on the anniversary of his death, someone would leave fresh roses beneath it, deep red ones that bloomed like hope in the morning sun. In the end, Bobby Thompson's death was not in vain. His story became a reminder that in moments of crisis, humanity must always triumph over bureaucracy, compassion over compliance, and love over law. The heart that stopped beating that Tuesday morning had started something far more powerful, a movement that would protect countless other hearts for generations to come. Some battles are worth fighting even when they begin in tragedy. Some losses become victories in ways we never expect. And sometimes, the greatest honor we can give to the dead is to ensure that their story prevents others from suffering the same fate. Bobby Thompson never knew he would become a symbol of change. But Eleanor Hayes made sure that his legacy lived on, one life saved at a time, one rule changed at a time, one heart still beating at a time. The story of that terrible morning would be told and retold, in courtrooms and classrooms, in training sessions for paramedics and meetings of homeowners associations. And each time it was told, it would serve as a reminder of what really matters when everything else falls away. Not the perfectly manicured lawns or the strictly enforced rules. Not the property values or the community standards. Just one human being trying to save another human being. Just a heart that refused to stop fighting. Just love in its most essential form.